Imagine this scenario. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and you are just flawlessly navigating this high-stakes negotiation.
Right, you're totally in the zone.
Exactly. You are anticipating counterarguments, you're reading the room, and you're articulating these really complex clauses without even breaking a sweat. You are, by all accounts, a master of communication. But then, fast forward to 5 o'clock. You're sitting on your couch, utterly paralyzed.
Oh, yeah, the classic crash.
Yeah, your partner asks why you're staring blankly at the wall or, why you suddenly seem so tense, and your mind just goes totally blank.
You have the vocabulary of a scholar,
But your emotional dashboard is just a brick. You can't even begin to form the words to explain the crushing weight in your chest.
Yeah.
And it begs the question, why does this happen?
It's a jarring contrast, isn't it? And, well, it happens because we carry around this deeply ingrained, honestly, often invisible assumption about how human beings operate.
Yeah.
We just assume that if someone possesses a high degree of verbal fluency, like if they can speak well and analyze external systems effectively, they automatically possess instant total self-awareness.
We expect the diagnostic report of our own minds to just be, ready to hand over the second someone asks what's wrong.
Exactly.
And when we can't produce that report, we immediately think we are failing. We think we're broken. So today, we are going into a deep dive on a profoundly insightful excerpt from a Substack post.
Yeah, it's called Reading Between Worlds. The self is not always visible to itself.
Such a great title. And the mission for our conversation today is to completely dismantle that assumption. We're going to look at why eloquent speech does not equal instant self-awareness.
And why expecting it to do so creates these massive compounding problems in adult life.
It really does.
It's a vital paradigm shift. I mean, especially for anyone who has ever felt that agonizing pressure to perfectly articulate their internal distress on demand.
Right.
What we are really unpacking here is a specific trap that catches highly competent people. The source material refers to it as the trap of verbal adulthood.
The trap of verbal adulthood. Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you are a teacher, a counselor, an advisor, a manager, essentially if your daily life requires you to perform fluency.
You're sitting right in the crosshairs of this trap.
Yes. Let's look at why that trap is so effective. If you spend your days analyzing systems or mediating conflicts, you have trained your brain to synthesize external information and present it clearly.
Yeah.
You are basically walking on a beautifully paved, multi-lane highway of verbal communication, and because you are so visibly good at driving on that highway, everyone around you makes this massive leap in logic.
Right. They assume that your internal emotional world is mapped out with the exact same paved roads.
And clear signage. It's like assuming someone who is brilliant at reading maps can instantly tell you their exact GPS coordinates without even looking.
That is such a good way to put it. That is the illusion of transparency. Your fluency creates this mirage that you have everything figured out internally.
But you don't.
No, because navigating that paved highway of language is a completely different neurological and psychological skill than diving into your own internal state.
Right.
What's fascinating here is the source material makes this striking distinction. Eloquence and immediacy are not the same thing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and more importantly, articulation and interoceptive access are entirely separate functions.
Wait, interoceptive access. Let's break that down because I think understanding the mechanics of that is where the light bulb really turns on for a lot of people.
Definitely.
How is sensing our internal state actually different from articulating a thought?
So interoception is your body's ability to sense its own internal physical state. It's the neurological pathway that lets you know your heart is racing or your stomach is dropping.
Or your muscles are bracing for impact, things like that.
Exactly. It is a deeply visceral, physical channel of information. Articulation, on the other hand, is a highly complex cognitive function.
Okay.
When you are under emotional distress, your brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, lights up like a Christmas tree.
Right, the classic fight or flight.
Right. And when the amygdala takes over to process a threat or a deep emotional shock, it can literally siphon resources away from the prefrontal cortex and the brain's language centers, like Broca's area.
Wait, really? So the literal machinery required to form a sentence is powering down exactly when the body is experiencing the physical sensation of distress?
Yes. Your brain is prioritizing survival and physical sensation over vocabulary.
That is wild.
So, tying this back to interoception versus articulation, you can be the most articulate orator in the world, but if your language center goes offline during a moment of overwhelm, Trying to find your emotional truth is no longer like driving on a paved highway.
It's like trying to find an underground spring in the pitch black using a divining rod.
Perfectly said. The tools that make you a great manager or a great teacher are utterly useless in that dark, subterranean space.
Which perfectly explains the 5 o'clock couch paralysis we talked about. The words are there for the 2 o'clock contract negotiation because there was no emotional threat.
Right.
But the words are not there for the internal physical reality. Yet the world still demands the words.
Always.
We are expected to know our feelings in what the source calls the approved order. You know, you experience an event, you process the emotion, and you deliver the spoken summary. 1, 2, 3.
And if you can't deliver it in that approved order, the consequences compound quickly.
Yeah.
When someone cannot explain their distress in real time, the default reaction of society, and honestly, often of our own inner critic, is to suspect pathology. We view the inability to immediately narrate our feelings as a symptom of being broken, rather than questioning the narrowness of the model we are being forced into.
Okay, I want to push back on that, though, just to play devil's advocate. Let's look at this from the perspective of the partner sitting next to you on the couch. If you and I are trying to build a life together, or even just run a project at work together, and I cannot explain what is wrong with me, isn't that inherently a failure of communication?
I mean, I see why it feels that way.
It creates friction, right?
Yeah.
It creates confusion. Why are we blaming society's narrow model instead of just saying, hey, we as individuals need to go to therapy and get better at communicating our feelings?
It's a really fair challenge, but we have to ask why we consider friction-free, immediate communication the ultimate baseline for mental health.
Okay.
Our modern societal model is built on the industrialization of time. It is a system deeply rooted in efficiency, productivity, and frankly, capitalism's demand for seamless interactions.
Wow, okay.
We have structured our workplaces, our schedules, and eventually our relationships around the idea of data extraction. We want the information and we want it now so we can solve the problem and move on to the next task.
So we're basically treating human beings like optimized hard drives. We want to plug in the USB, download the emotional diagnostic report, and run the patch.
Exactly. But human emotion doesn't run on an industrialized timeline. Our internal knowledge rarely travels in a straight line from feeling to thought to speech.
Right.
Forcing the vast, sprawling, chaotic reality of human processing into an immediate, linear, highly efficient box is what pathologizes a completely normal human experience.
So the model really is the problem.
When we call that model narrow, we are pointing out that society has zero tolerance for the natural delay of human processing. If you don't fit the immediate data extraction model, you are labeled as having a communication disorder.
Or being intentionally withholding or emotionally stunted.
Exactly. We have to stop treating nonlinear access as a pathology.
So by treating it as a pathology, we are basically punishing people for having a human nervous system instead of a corporate operating system.
That's exactly it.
It completely reframes the experience. It's not that you are failing to access your feelings. You are accessing them on a different timeline through a different route.
Which brings us to the crucial question. If we throw out this narrow expectation of instant articulation, what replaces it? How are we actually supposed to map out what we're feeling if the language centers are offline?
This is where the source material offers a really profound alternative framework. If the direct route is blocked, we have to turn toward our physical bodies. We have to, as the author puts it, treat delay as data.
And that delay manifests in very physical, undeniable ways. A sudden, blinding migraine on a Thursday. A desperate, almost panicky need for solitude after a seemingly normal interaction.
These aren't random glitches.
No, not at all.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's map out how that actually works. Say you experience a massive stressor on Monday, like a conflict at work, a piece of bad news.
Right.
Your verbal brain, because you are a competent adult who performs fluency, says, we don't have time for this, keep moving. You power through the week. But on Thursday, you are hit with this migraine, or you suddenly cannot stand the sound of your partner's voice. Usually our reaction to that Thursday crash is massive shame.
Oh, absolutely. We think, why am I snapping over nothing? Why is my body betraying me?
Right.
But the shame is the direct result of still believing in the approved order. You feel ashamed because the emotional receipt is arriving 3 days late.
Wow, the emotional receipt. I love that.
But physiologically, what's happening is that on Monday, your body pumped you full of adrenaline and cortisol to help you survive the stressor and keep performing. It masked the emotional hit.
Okay.
By Thursday, when you finally have a moment of safety where the adrenaline wears off, the nervous system says, okay, we kept the score, and here's the bill. The body acts as a slow processing reservoir.
So that Thursday migraine isn't a breakdown of the system. It's like a notification ping.
Yes.
It is literal data arriving on its own schedule. Your body translated the distress from Monday, and it is handing you the printout now.
And the most striking insight the source offers about this process is the idea that the body's refusal can be a form of truth.
The body's refusal can be a form of truth.
Think about the weight of that. The sudden fatigue, the inability to speak, the urge to leave a room. These are not obstacles preventing you from finding the truth of how you feel. They are the truth.
That is so powerful. We spend so much energy trying to cure the refusal. We take a pill for the headache. We force ourselves to go to the social event anyway.
We demand that our brains supply the words.
Exactly. We treat the body's no as a hurdle to jump over so we can get back to being fluent and productive. But the refusal is the realization itself.
It is. And your ultimate task, if you relate to this experience, is not to force yourself to become immediately readable to others. You don't need to try harder to be a vending machine of perfectly articulated emotions.
Right.
The task is to build better trust in your own roots.
Trusting your own roots, that requires a huge leap of faith, especially when your route looks nothing like the fast lane everyone else is driving in. But let's follow this through. Once you do start trusting those delayed routes, once you accept the migraine as a message and the delay as data, how does that internal realization finally make its way into the outside world?
Because eventually we do have to communicate.
Right, we have to communicate with the people in our lives. So what does this all mean? If the truth isn't coming out in a neat, linear bullet point list, what does it actually sound like when it surfaces?
It sounds sideways.
Sideways?
Yeah, the source material defends what it calls the compulsion to tell the story sideways.
Yeah.
This is when communication finally happens, but it comes out as metaphor or talking in looping circles.
Or even fixating on something entirely mundane like the weather.
Exactly.
So how does this actually show up in your daily life? Imagine you are sitting with a friend and you know they've had a brutal week at work. Maybe they're feeling deeply undervalued and on the verge of quitting.
Right.
You ask them how they are doing. And instead of looking at you and saying, I am struggling with feeling undervalued, they start going on this long, looping tangent about the weather. Oh, I've seen this so many times.
Right. They talk about how the gray skies outside are just relentless and how the dampness is getting into the walls of their house. And they just keep circling back to this metaphor of structural dampness and inescapable grayness. The immediate instinct, especially if you are a problem solver, is to interrupt and say, okay, I get it, it's raining, but what is actually wrong at work?
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, if you interrupt them like that, you are dragging them right back into the narrow model of efficiency.
You are demanding the direct data.
But what is actually happening in their brain in that moment is incredible. The compulsion to tell the story sideways through the metaphor of the damp walls is not avoidance. It is the route by which coherence becomes possible.
They are actively constructing the scaffolding for the truth right in front of you.
Exactly. Because the core emotion like, I am undervalued and my career is falling apart, is too massive, too overwhelming for the language centers to process directly without triggering the amygdala and shutting the whole system down again. So the brain uses semantic networks.
Yes. It finds an adjacent concept, dampness, structural rot, relentless grayness. And it uses that adjacent concept to safely activate the edges of the neural network.
It reminds me of looking at a really faint star in the night sky. I don't know if you've ever tried this, but if you stare directly at a faint star, it completely disappears.
Oh, that's true.
Right. The photoreceptors in the center of your eye aren't sensitive enough to catch it. It's only when you use your peripheral vision, when you look slightly to the side of the star, that the rods in your eyes can actually pick up the faint light. You literally have to look sideways to see it clearly.
That is a brilliant way to understand the mechanism. If you stare directly at the emotional core, under the harsh fluorescent lights of immediate interrogation, the self vanishes.
It washes out.
The brain freezes. But if you allow the peripheral vision, the sideways story, the loops about the weather, the coherence slowly begins to emerge. The weather isn't a distraction from the truth. It is the divining rod that you're using to find it.
Which means, as listeners, as partners, as friends, our job is to sit in the damp room with them.
Yes.
Our job is to let them talk about the weather until the scaffolding is strong enough to hold the actual truth. We have to grant ourselves and others the grace to wander.
Sideways is a legitimate destination path.
Yeah.
When the direct linear connection between feeling and speaking is severed by stress, the brain has to find a back door. The loops and the repetition are the brain's back door into understanding itself.
So let's bring all of this back to the surface and synthesize what we've uncovered. We started by diagnosing a very specific modern illusion, the idea that eloquence and verbal fluency equal immediate self-awareness.
And we completely dismantled that.
We did. Just because you are a competent adult who can navigate external systems flawlessly, it does not mean you have instant access to your internal physical state.
We examined how the biological reality of interoception is entirely separate from the cognitive skill of articulation. And because of that separation, we have to fundamentally reject society's industrialized, narrow model that demands immediate data extraction from human emotions. Nonlinear processing is not a pathology. It is a biological reality.
And we also looked at how to navigate that nonlinear reality. We have to start treating delay as data. Your body is keeping the score, and when it hands you the receipt 3 days later in the form of a migraine or a sudden withdrawal, that isn't a failure.
No, it is your truth arriving on its own necessary timeline.
Exactly. And finally, we explored the necessity of the sideways story, embracing the metaphors, the loops, and the indirect peripheral vision as the very tools the brain uses to build coherence when the direct route is just too overwhelming. So if you are someone who feels that constant suffocating pressure to perfectly articulate your internal life on demand, the ultimate takeaway here is permission.
Permission to release the pressure.
Yes. You are not a machine requiring a software patch. You are a complex landscape, and it takes time to map a landscape. Your routes, however winding, delayed, or sideways they may be, are entirely valid.
But as we close this deep dive, there is one final lingering implication of this material that I really want you to consider.
Okay.
We discussed how society demands that we translate our internal state into an approved order of words. We discussed treating the body's refusal as a profound form of truth.
Right.
So consider this. If the body's refusal, the sudden fatigue, the blank mind, the overwhelming need to retreat, is indeed a form of absolute, undeniable truth, what happens in your life when you finally stop trying to translate it?
Oh, wow.
What happens when you stop searching for the eloquent words to justify your boundaries and simply allow the body's no to stand as a complete sentence?
Let the body's no stand as a complete sentence, no receipt required, no polished diagnostic report to hand over.
Just the absolute truth of the system powering down when it needs to.
Keep that in mind the next time the world demands your exact coordinates. And remember, you are perfectly allowed to just tell them about the rain.